Welcome to our Hispanic Heritage Month workshop series. We are super excited today to be joined by Gabriel Saiz, Sustainability Program Coordinator in the Madison Mayor's Office. So Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us, and we would love if you could start us off just by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit of your story.
Of course. Yeah, I'm Gabriel Saiz. I work for the City of Madison Mayor's Office in the Sustainability Program. I manage a lot of programs related to climate change, climate resiliency, and supporting community organizations and meeting their climate goals. My story is one of Indigenous sustainability in my academic life, my professional life, and my personal life, and seeing how, as an Indigenous person, as a Ponca person, we can integrate our knowledge of environmental systems and governmental systems into our infrastructure, into our society in a way that promotes sustainability, promotes good relations between neighbors, and promotes nutrition, wellness, and health. And all of this is related to climate change because so many of the systems that have led to greenhouse gas emissions and to environmental degradation are tied to systems that are not good for us, do not promote good relations between people, and do not promote good relations between humans and the planet. And so that's kind of been my journey. I am a descendant also of Mexican immigrants from many generations. My mother's a first gen in the United States, and I'm a first generation descendant of hers in the United States. But I'm also an Indigenous person, so I've lived in a country that my ancestors have been in for thousands of years as well. And so I think that's an important thing to mention also during this time is that the dichotomy between kind of immigrants and Indigenous people is a manifestation of this kind of systems that through my work I kind of try to de-establish.
Yeah, it's really important work. Thank you for everything that you do. So I wondered if you could share a little bit too about just how you got involved in environmental and sustainability work. And you talked about this a little bit already, but just how your cultural roots and connection with Indigenous communities in support of tribal sovereignty and environmental justice has informed that work.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. My native family's lived in Madison for 50 years now. So we have a long history in this community. And I was raised by my grandmother. We're Ponca, so Ponca people are not indigenous to this area. We're indigenous to Nebraska, and there's also Ponca people in Oklahoma as well. But as indigenous people, we maintained relationships with people, local Ho-Chunk people in the community, and we were also a part of kind of the Native community that existed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a lot of community was built there as well. And so growing up in this environment, I was very attached to my Native identity, to my Ponca identity. I viewed kind of the way that I was moving through the world from a Native lens. And I became involved with something called the Indigenous Arts and Sciences program at the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. At that time, it was actually at the Arboretum site at Curtis Prairie. I began to interact with that program as a middle schooler that was learning the native names of plants, right? And learning about the indigenous history of controlled burns on prairies, the history of indigenous people in the Four Lakes area, and kind of just learning about, the importance of indigenous perspectives in understanding ecology, right? That was the focus of that program. There was also like a component of it that was dedicated to Hispanic people as well. So there was a partnership between the Indigenous Arts and Sciences program and the broader Earth Partnership program, which also had students from the University of Wisconsin-Madison go to Puerto Rico and do dune restorations there. There were partnerships between the Earth Partnership and the Catholic Multicultural Center, which was a really important part of supporting the Hispanic community on the south side of Madison. And so there was just this beautiful ecosystem of kind of like environmental work, sustainability work, native plant work, and also kind of indigenous perspectives, Hispanic perspectives integrated into kind of the broader community in Madison and supporting the community work that was happening in Madison. And so from that perspective, I kind of proceeded through high school. I kind of became a teacher of teachers and would also kind of interact with high school teachers during their professional training development and kind of speak to them about how they could interact with Indigenous people to recognize their contributions to the sciences. and be more inclusive in the way that they were teaching. And that was also through the Earth Partnership. And then as well, as I was kind of going through school here in Madison, I kind of learned that I was good at science, I was good at math, and that was kind of a path that I wanted to pursue. So I wanted to be, a biologist. I wanted to be someone that was invested in the health kind of the natural community, and a lot of that had to do with native prairie restoration. So understanding kind of what did indigenous people do to the landscape prior to colonization, how did that change, what impacts has that had, and how can we think about reviving some of those practices in our very developed and infrastructure heavy society that we have now. And so that was the lens that I took when I was admitted to Stanford and attended Stanford. And while I was at Stanford, it was kind of like, history repeated itself. I got involved kind of in the intertribal Native community there. I was also very involved in the Hispanic community at Stanford. And a lot of the work that we were doing was solidarity based, and less of it was about the environment, and a lot more of it was about kind of just the coexistence and collaboration of all people to, have a healthy life, and to maintain our safety and our wellness, in these academic spaces as well. So there was a lot of organizing that was happening. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to do research in Northern California with indigenous communities in Northern California. And in California, fire, you might even say, was a more important part of their management of ecosystems, because it is a very fire adapted ecosystem in California. And in California, in Wisconsin, indigenous people had agricultural systems in addition to kind of the land management systems that they had. In California, they almost created like an agricultural system from natural land management. So the food systems were so dense, resources that they were able to manifest for basketry and other industries that they had in their communities, they were able to support that all through cultural burning practices, right? And all of that ended during the colonial period. And so the ecosystems that you see now in California are actually quite different than they were pre-contact with the Spaniards and Anglos. And so just having that, environment to do research in was incredible, because you're seeing the transition of ecosystems through different states. You're seeing different interventions in those ecosystems. The nutrients in the soil change, the plant communities change, and you're also learning about how can you support communities through these ecosystem practices and these cultural practices. So, through a combination of that, I became involved with kind of conservation, and that's kind of the route that I ended up taking: indigenous conservation, indigenous governance, and also kind of like this eye toward how do you build collaboration between different groups of people that are very similar. Like I said, like the Hispanic community, indigenous community might be considered separate in some circumstances, but in a lot of times they're the same. It's the same with the Black community, the Asian community. There's always been opportunities for collaboration in all of the spaces that I've existed in. And making sure that everyone has the ability to influence the environment and influence the kinds of strategies that we're using to conserve land was also a really important part of kind of taking a look at climate and sustainability, and thinking, how can we give everyone equal access to these opportunities also in renewable energy and energy efficiency and other economic opportunities. And so that's how I started to get involved more in the climate space, kind of jumping from conservation and coordination between groups and building solidarity movements more into kind of understanding how can we make sure that everyone gets a piece of the economic pie from solving climate change, and how do we get everyone to understand that this is actually like just such an important thing to address in the world. And so I did that work as a conservationist and as a science educator at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix. And eventually I became more involved with politics. I saw that there was an opportunity in Madison to become more involved in the sustainability program, which is now and has been focused a lot on climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the city. And I applied, knowing that I had the connections here, I had maintained the connections here, and I wanted to be able to give people the opportunity to participate in our programs from my perspective as like a community organizer. And so that's what I've been involved in, working with different entities, for profit and nonprofits in Madison, to help them meet their decarbonization goals, and understand how we can all kind of fight climate change together.
Yeah, it really is all connected, isn't it?
Yeah, it's super connected.
Yeah, and those collaborations and that solidarity between groups of people is the only way I feel like that we're going to move forward on climate issues and sustainability work.
Absolutely.
So thank you for all your work in that area. And you kind of already mentioned about how your study of economics connects to your work in sustainability. But I wonder too if you could talk a little bit about something that I know you've shared in the past about community care is one of the most important pieces of the work of decolonization in our community.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, when I was organizing on campus, and I was a part of like the Sanford American Indian Organization, and kind of like a collaborative group between kind of the Black community, Indigenous community, Hispanic community, and Asian community on campus. There was, a big emphasis on kind of like the political positions that we would take. And I thought that was really important. But at the same time, I found that, one of the most important things that we could do on campus was create spaces where we all felt safe, where everyone felt cared for. A lot of that had to do with food. And I also found that when people had access to being able to interact with natural spaces, conservation spaces, a lot of the time, there was a facilitation of like camaraderie that otherwise wouldn't have existed, right? And so, this kind of interconnection between like understanding natural systems, enjoying kind of agricultural systems, in community gardens, but also understanding like just all of the natural resources that are available through indigenous plants at the same time, and kind of taking people into those spaces. As a docent, so I was a docent at certain spaces at Stanford, to educate people about the natural environment, taking people there, showing them kind of the resources that existed there, but also interacting with urban farms. And then taking that, those food resources from there, respecting them from an indigenous perspective, from a cultural perspective, and utilizing that knowledge, either in deciding, the kinds of food that we would buy, from like indigenous people in the Bay Area have restaurants, and a lot of people don't know about indigenous cuisine, or even like, the different food cultures that exist in the Bay Area, of which there are so many, and it's so many beautiful cultures. Or just, cooking for ourselves, but providing that food, providing that connection to nature was so important for community wellness. And I found that that was, I think, the most essential part of, organizing and keeping people together, and keeping your community well. And a lot of that is based on my understanding of my culture as a Ponca person, because I've been told by elders that, an indication of leadership, or an indication of someone who really has the people's interests at heart, is someone that gives them water and gives them food, and that is very labor intensive, cooking, getting everything prepared, creating the space, blessing the food. All of that is a very labor intensive process. And so that indicates to people that you care about them a lot. And so that is kind of like the cultural perspective on the work that I did as an organizer to make sure that everyone was good.
Yeah, in those spaces where um, people can build deeper relationships with the natural world around them too. I feel like the emotional connection is so important for then taking the action needed to protect natural systems. So that is a beautiful way to share that, the community care. I wondered if you could share too about some of your work at the city, including the Youth Climate Action Program.
Yeah. So a lot of the work that we do, or that I do, has become kind of more detached from natural systems and ecosystems, and is more focused on the infrastructure that we have as a city. So the opportunities to decrease greenhouse gas emissions are attached to our transportation systems, our buildings, our homes, the types of industries that exist in Madison, and also the, industrial agricultural systems that exist around Madison, right? Farming and stuff like that can really release methane. And so the component of it that I work on specifically is residential energy efficiency. So looking at housing, both multifamily and single family, and analyzing ways that we can support people investing in energy efficiency so they can reduce their utility bills, but also reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of the programs that we work with are also centered around affordability, not only in utility bills, but also in rents. So one of the programs that I work really intensely on is the Efficiency Navigator program, where we seek out landlords that charge market level rents, do decarbonization measures on their housing, and they agree to perpetual affordable rents for the remainder of the time that they have those improvements on their housing. So we have a lot of opportunities to kind of improve affordability, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's kind of where my economics background also comes in, is kind of like analyzing, like, we may be spending money on these systems, but also like, what are the social benefits? What is the total social benefit of the programs that we're running? On top of that, though, there are a lot of community organizations in Madison that are doing excellent work in natural systems, in organizing, and communicating to people about the health impacts of climate change. And so supporting those people through an air quality monitoring program that we run, and teaching people how to educate each other about like increased wildfire risks that are due to climate change. A lot of that coming from Canada, and those ecosystems that have been affected by climate change, but also by a lack of indigenous burning, has been really interesting. But also kind of providing people resources. One of the things that you can't do as an administrator or someone that's trying to make change in the system is ask people to do labor for free. So I've been a champion of trying to get philanthropic funding for us to support community organizations that agree to enact their mission, in addition to kind of trying to tackle the climate change issue as well. And so a lot of that looked like kind of working with organizations to kind of, you may have a focus on, uh, you know, career development, job development, career education. You might have a focus on urban farming. You might have a focus on kind of organizing and education, and kind of speaking to people about, what are ways that we can integrate climate change into those things. So, I mentioned agricultural systems from an industrial perspective. In Wisconsin, the really cool thing about working with Rooted this year has kind of been looking at, how do these non-industrial agricultural systems work, and how can they actually sequester carbon? And one of those ways is no-till farming, or keeping, permaculture up, not messing with the environment, and allowing carbon to settle in the soil, and be sequestered in the soil, which we're doing through the food forest. Other examples have been kind of helping programs that do career development look for opportunities in solar farming, right? Or to get involved in the solar industry, to become involved in kind of like GIS systems and mapping systems, so we can understand the impacts that climate change is having on ecosystems, and just becoming more aware of different academic paths to, solve the climate change issue, like engineering, or being involved in the government, right, and administering programs like the ones I'm administering to address climate change. So there's a broad range of things that I do for the city, but all of them are essentially related to kind of increasing affordability, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, and helping community partners understand their important role in helping our community combat climate change.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know this Youth Climate Action Grant has been transformative for our youth at Rooted. Really, this working on this project, they've learned so much, and they're hoping to, with it, also teach just the wider community. So thank you for the work you do in all those areas, and just the Youth Climate Action Grant, a special shout out to that one, as we've been experiencing that on the ground this season. Is there anything else, Gabriel, that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think this has been wonderful. Thank you for wanting to speak to me and hear a little bit more about my story. Um, I think during this, period of time where, there's a lot of anxiety in our society, it's so beautiful to be able to be in a space like this, and just see the community kind of thriving in the way that it is.
Well, thank you so much for what you do at the city level to support spaces like these and all of the other spaces that you touch with your work. Really, all the incredible and impactful work that you do in the community is very appreciated. And thanks so much for taking the time to share with us. And you all at home, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.